The job seemed simple enough: work the night shift at a gas station, earn some extra cash. The problem: this particular gas station came with a set of rules that defied explanation. Rules that, if broken, unleashed terrors beyond imagination. In this video, I'll take you through my harrowing experience and the 9 crucial rules that kept me alive through the night. From avoiding eye contact with certain customers to locking the door at precisely 3:36 a.m., each rule served a purpose in this twisted reality. By the end, you'll understand why following these strange instructions wasn't just about keeping my job, it was about surviving until dawn. The neon sign flickered weakly in the distance, a beacon of light in the vast darkness of Route 66. As I pulled into the gas station, gravel crunching under my tires, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a time warp. The place looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s, all faded paint and rusted metal. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, taking in the scene. The night was oppressively quiet, broken only by the soft hum of ancient refrigerators and the occasional ping of cooling metal. The forecourt was empty, save for a single moth fluttering desperately around the dim light above the pump. My stomach twisted with a mixture of desperation and unease. I needed this job badly. The last few months had been a downward spiral of unpaid bills and missed rent. My landlord's patience was wearing thin, and the thought of another night in my car made my skin crawl. But something about this place felt off. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. The station looked like it had been plucked straight out of an old postcard, complete with rusted Coca-Cola signs and faded advertisements for products that probably didn't exist anymore. It was a relic, a forgotten piece of Americana slowly crumbling in the desert. As I approached the store, I couldn't help but think about the decline of these Route 66 gas stations. Once vibrant pit stops on the Great American Road Trip, now they were ghostly reminders of a bygone era. How many had I passed on my way here, boarded up and abandoned? The bell above the door jingled as I entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The interior was a bizarre mix of old and new vintage shelving stocked with modern snacks, an ancient cash register next to a sleek card reader. Behind the counter stood an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, eyes hidden behind thick glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights. "Help you?" His voice was gruff, tinged with suspicion. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I'm here about the job. The night shift position." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached under the counter and pulled out a yellowed envelope. My heart raced as he slid it across the counter. "Rules are inside," he said. "Follow him to the letter, or don't bother showing up." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the envelope. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to find another job, any other job. But the thought of another night of hunger, of sleeping in my car, steeled my resolve. I picked up the envelope. "When do I start?" The old man's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Tonight. Shift starts at midnight." As I left the store, envelope clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. But I had no choice. It was either this or homelessness. How bad could a night shift at a gas station be? Little did I know I was about to find out exactly how bad it could get. And it all started with the rules in that innocent-looking envelope. They say curiosity killed the cat, but in my case it might just save me from homelessness. Still, as I stared at the envelope in my shaking hands, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of job comes with a sealed set of rules? And more importantly, what happens if you break them? I sat in my car, the engine ticking as it cooled, and studied the yellowed paper. The old attendant's words echoed in my mind: "Follow him to the letter, or don't bother showing up." My fingers traced the edge of the seal, torn between the desperate need for employment and the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. The gas station loomed before me, a silent sentinel in the night. Its vintage facade seemed to hide secrets, whispers of a bygone era trapped in peeling paint and rusted metal. I found myself cataloging every detail, as if searching for clues to some unseen puzzle. The flickering neon sign cast an eerie glow across the empty forecourt, transforming ordinary shadows into lurking specters. My gaze drifted to the store window, where I could just make out my own reflection, a pale, haggard face framed by disheveled hair. The last few months had taken their toll, leaving me a shadow of my former self. I wondered if that's why the old man had hired me so quickly. Perhaps desperation was a prerequisite for this particular night shift. As the minutes ticked by, the silence of the desert night pressed in around me. I'd always considered myself a bit of a night owl, but this was different. There was an unnatural stillness here, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I thought about the research I'd done on night shift work, trying to prepare myself for this new reality. The articles had mentioned increased anxiety, fatigue, and a sense of isolation, but they hadn't prepared me for this, the oppressive weight of the unknown, the feeling that I was about to step into a world where the normal rules no longer applied. My fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as I weighed my options. I could drive away now, back to the relative safety of my soon-to-be repossessed car and empty bank account. Or I could open the envelope and embrace whatever strangeness awaited me inside that time-warped gas station. With a deep breath, I made my decision. The seal broke with a soft tear, and I pulled out a single sheet of paper. As I unfolded it, my heart raced, anticipation and fear mingling in my chest. The page was filled with a list, each item neatly typed in an old-fashioned font. Rule 1. Do not make eye contact with customers wearing sunglasses at night. I blinked, reading the line again. What kind of rule was that? It seemed absurd, almost comical. But as I scanned the rest of the list, the rules only grew stranger, each one more unsettling than the last. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what I'd gotten myself into. This wasn't just a job, it was a descent into a world of paranoia and supernatural dread. But I was out of options, out of time and out of money. I had no choice but to step into the unknown and pray I could follow these bizarre instructions to the letter. With trembling hands, I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:55 p.m. It was time to start my shift and face whatever horrors awaited me behind that jingling bell door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unnatural glow across the empty aisles. I tried to focus on arranging the cigarette display, but my mind kept wandering to that first rule. What kind of person wears sunglasses at night anyway? And why would avoiding eye contact be so crucial? Little did I know, I was about to find out exactly why some rules are meant to be followed no matter how strange they might seem. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. Sure, the old man had seemed dead serious about following the rules, but this one, it had to be a joke, right? I mean, who actually comes into a gas station at night wearing shades? I chalked it up to the eccentricities of small-town life and tried to push it from my mind. The bell above the door chimed, startling me from my thoughts. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. A tall figure stood in the doorway, face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. And there, perched on their nose, was a pair of dark sunglasses. My breath caught in my throat as the first rule echoed in my mind: do not make eye contact with customers wearing sunglasses at night. Suddenly, the rule didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. An inexplicable dread washed over me as the customer moved silently through the store, their footsteps unnaturally quiet on the linoleum floor. I forced myself to look down, focusing intently on the cash register as if it held the secrets of the universe. My heart raced as I heard them approach the counter. Every instinct screamed at me to look up, to meet their gaze and assert some semblance of control over the situation. I'd always prided myself on making connections with people, on using eye contact to build trust and rapport. But now, faced with this mysterious figure, I found myself paralyzed by an irrational fear. The customer placed their items on the counter, a pack of gum and a bottle of water. Nothing unusual, nothing sinister. Yet the air felt thick with tension, as if some unseen force was watching our every move. My hands trembled as I rang up the purchase, careful to keep my eyes fixed on the register's display. "That'll be $3.50, I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. A pale hand appeared in my peripheral vision, placing exact change on the counter. I scooped up the money, dropping a nickel in my haste. As I bent to retrieve it, I caught a glimpse of the customer's face reflected in the polished floor. For a moment, I thought I saw something behind those dark lenses, a flash of inhuman eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light. I jerked upright, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. But when I dared to look again, the customer was already turning away, items in hand. They moved towards the exit with that same eerie silence, pausing for just a moment at the threshold. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. And then they were gone, the bell chiming cheerfully in their wake. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As the adrenaline began to fade, I was left with a gnawing sense of unease. What had I just experienced? And more importantly, what other horrors did the remaining rules protect me from? I pulled out the crumpled list from my pocket, my eyes scanning down to the next instruction. A chill ran down my spine as I read the words: "If you hear whistling, close the register drawer immediately and stand still until it stops." Something told me this was going to be a very long night. They say that in the dead of night, when the world grows still, our minds play tricks on us. But what if those tricks aren't just figments of our imagination? What if they're warnings of something ancient and terrifying, lurking just beyond the veil of our reality? I stood behind the counter, my eyes darting nervously around the empty store. The encounter with the sunglasses-wearing customer had left me shaken, and suddenly the list of rules didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. I pulled the crumpled paper from my pocket, my fingers trembling as I read the second rule. If you hear whistling, close the register drawer immediately and stand still until it stops. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the aisles. Every little noise made me jump, the soft whir of the refrigerators, the occasional ping of the metal roof cooling in the night air. I tried to distract myself by restocking the shelves, but my mind kept wandering back to that ominous instruction. As I arranged a display of energy drinks, a chill ran down my spine. Was that whistling? I froze, straining my ears. For a moment there was nothing but the usual ambient sounds of the store. Then I heard it again, a faint melodic whistle, drifting through the air like a ghostly tune. Panic seized me. I bolted for the register, my heart pounding in my chest. The whistling grew louder, clearer, as if whatever was making the sound was getting closer. With shaking hands, I slammed the cash drawer shut, the metallic clang echoing through the empty store. I stood rigid behind the counter, hardly daring to breathe. The whistling continued, a haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My mind raced with half-remembered stories and superstitions about whistling. In some cultures, it was said to attract spirits or summon the dead. Others believed it could bring bad luck or invite disaster. As the eerie tune wove its way through the store, I found myself wondering about its source. Was it a customer I couldn't see? Some kind of supernatural entity? Or was it something even stranger, a tear in the fabric of reality, letting through sounds from another world? The whistling grew louder, more insistent. I could feel sweat beating on my forehead, my muscles tense and aching from standing so still. Part of me wanted to run, to flee into the night and never look back. But a deeper, more primal instinct kept me rooted to the spot. Breaking the rules here didn't just mean losing a job, it could mean losing something far more precious. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the whistling began to fade. It grew softer and softer until it was nothing more than a whisper on the edge of hearing. And then, finally, silence fell over the store once more. I let out a shaky breath, my legs nearly buckling beneath me. What had just happened? What would have occurred if I hadn't followed the rule? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. As the adrenaline faded, I was left with a bone-deep weariness and a growing sense of dread. If the first two rules had proven so terrifyingly real, what horrors did the remaining instructions protect me from? I pulled out the list again, my eyes landing on the third rule. A chill ran through me as I read the words, "The bathroom door locks on its own after midnight. Do not attempt to enter after this time." I glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes until midnight. 15 minutes until I'd face whatever nightmarish reality awaited me next. 15 minutes. In any other job, that would be a trivial amount of time. But here, in this gas station on Route 66, those 15 minutes stretched before me like an eternity. I found myself fixated on the bathroom door, my mind racing with questions. What force could make a door lock itself? And more importantly, what was it keeping out or in? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow making the linoleum floor look sickly and pale. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, trying to ignore the growing pressure in my bladder. The night's events had left me on edge, and now this most basic of human needs was becoming a source of mounting dread. I glanced at the clock again. 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes until midnight. 10 minutes to decide if I was going to risk it or spend the next 8 hours in increasing discomfort. My eyes darted between the bathroom door and the clock, each tick of the second hand feeling like a countdown to some unseen doom. The rational part of my brain tried to assert itself. It's just a bathroom, I tells true. What could possibly happen? But the memory of the whistling, of those sunglasses glinting in the fluorescent light, silenced that voice of reason. In this place, the ordinary rules of reality didn't seem to apply. 11:55 p.m. The pressure was becoming unbearable. I took a hesitant step towards the bathroom, then froze. The air felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The space between me and that innocuous-looking door seemed to stretch and warp, as if it were more than just a few feet of linoleum separating us. I thought about the concept of liminal spaces, those in between areas that exist on the threshold of one state and another. Doorways, hallways, waiting rooms, places where the veil between worlds grows thin. Was that what this gas station was? Some kind of cosmic waiting room? Trapped between our world and something else? 11:58 p.m. My palms were slick with sweat as I edged closer to the bathroom. The door loomed before me, suddenly more ominous than any door had a right to be. I reached out, my hand trembling as it neared the handle. Just a quick trip, I told myself. In and out before midnight strikes. My fingers brushed cool metal. And then I heard it, a soft click, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. I yanked my hand back as if I'd been burned, stumbling away from the door. The clock on the wall showed 12 a.m. exactly. I stood there, heart pounding, as the implications of what had just happened sank in. The door had locked itself, right on schedule. If I'd been a few seconds faster, if I'd given in to that physical need, I shuddered, not wanting to think about what might have happened. As I made my way back to the counter on shaky legs, a chilling certainty settled over me. This wasn't just a job with some eccentric rules. Something was very, very wrong here, and I had a sinking feeling that the night was far from over. The witching hour. It's a time when the veil between worlds is said to be at its thinnest. But here, in this godforsaken gas station, it seemed that darkness had its own schedule, and at 2:10 a.m., it would come calling. Literally. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ancient rotary phone perched on the counter. Its presence, once unremarkable, now felt like a ticking time bomb. The fourth rule echoed in my mind. If the phone rings between 2:10 a.m. and 2:17 a.m., do not answer it. Simple enough, right? But as the minutes crawled by, each tick of the clock felt like a hammer blow to my nerves. 2:09 a.m. My palms were slick with sweat, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would drown out any ring. What kind of call comes at such a specific time? And more importantly, who or what would be on the other end of the line? The second hand swept past 12, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, with a shrill cry that nearly stopped my heart, the phone erupted into life. The sound cut through the quiet store like a knife, each ring more insistent than the last. I stumbled back, bumping into a display of chips that cascaded to the floor. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it the old man who'd hired me, checking to see if I was following the rules? Or something more sinister entity from beyond our world, trying to make contact? I thought of old legends about crossroads and deals made at midnight. Was this gas station some kind of cosmic switchboard? The ringing continued, relentless. Each unanswered call felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. I paced behind the counter, hands clenched into fists to stop them from reaching for the receiver. Part of me, a reckless, curious part, wanted to answer, to solve the mystery that had been gnawing at me all night. But a deeper instinct, something primal and afraid, kept me rooted in place. I thought of the whistling, of the bathroom door locking itself. Breaking the rules here wasn't just about losing a job, it was about survival. 2:15 a.m. 2 more minutes of this torment. The ringing had taken on an almost plaintive quality, as if whatever was calling knew its time was running out. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, the temptation. When I opened them again, I could have sworn I saw the phone cord writhing like a snake. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when my resolve was stretched to its breaking point, silence fell. The sudden absence of sound was almost as jarring as the ringing had been. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. on the dot. I sagged against the counter, exhaustion washing over me. The phone sat innocently in its cradle, as if nothing had happened. But the air felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Whatever had been trying to reach this world had failed this time. As my heartbeat slowly returned to normal, a chilling thought crept into my mind. I'd survived the phone call, yes, but the night was far from over. And something told me that each rule I followed, each horror I avoided, was only leading me deeper into a labyrinth of supernatural dread. With shaking hands, I pulled out the list of rules once more. What fresh terror awaited me next? I stared at the list, my eyes drawn to the next rule like a moth to flame. The words seemed to shimmer on the page, a sinister promise of what was to come. At exactly 3:36 a.m., lock the front door. Simple enough, but why such a specific time? And more importantly, what would happen if I didn't? The clock ticked steadily onward, each second bringing me closer to 3:36 a.m. I paced behind the counter, my footsteps echoing in the empty store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow making the shadows in the corners seem deeper, more menacing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. As the minutes crawled by, I found myself hyper-aware of every little sound. The hum of the refrigerators, the occasional ping of the metal roof cooling in the night air, each noise made me jump, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I tried to distract myself by straightening displays, but my eyes kept darting to the clock, then to the door, then back again. 3:30 a.m. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, my heart racing. What was coming? What could be so dangerous that it required such precise timing to keep it out? 3:33 a.m. A shadow flitted past the window, too quick for me to make out clearly. I froze, holding my breath. There it was again, a dark shape, moving with an unnatural fluidity. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. 3:35 a.m. A low, guttural sound drifted through the night air. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a moan, but something in between that made my skin crawl. I edged closer to the door, my hand hovering near the lock. The shape outside seemed to grow more solid, more present with each passing second. 3:36 a.m. My trembling fingers turned the lock just as something slammed against the door. The entire building shook with the impact. I stumbled backward, my heart in my throat. The door rattled in its frame as whatever was outside tried to force its way in. I pressed myself against the far wall, watching in horror as the handle jiggled violently. The seconds stretched into eternity. In that moment, I understood the true weight of the rules. This wasn't just a job, it was a nightly battle against forces I couldn't begin to comprehend. 3:37 a.m. As suddenly as it had begun, the assault on the door ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. I remained frozen in place, afraid that any movement might somehow invite the entity back. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door. Through the glass, I could see nothing but the empty forecourt, bathed in the sickly glow of the overhead lights. As the adrenaline began to fade, I was left with a bone-deep weariness and a growing sense of dread. If the first 5 rules had proven so terrifyingly real, what horrors did the remaining instructions protect me from? I pulled out the list again, my eyes landing on the 6th rule. A chill ran through me as I read the words. If a customer asks for directions to the other side, tell them the station is closed and direct them back to the highway. The night was far from over, and I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. They say Route 66 is haunted by the ghosts of travelers past, but nothing could have prepared me for what walked through that door. The air seemed to thicken, time slowing to a crawl as a customer approached the counter. Their request was simple, yet impossibly ominous. I'm looking for the other side. In that moment, I realized the gas station wasn't just a waypoint on a journey, it was a crossroads between our world and something far more sinister. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the stranger's face. They were tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed just a bit too long. Their eyes, when they met mine, held a depth that made my stomach lurch. It wasn't quite human, that gaze, more like staring into an abyss that stared right back. The other side, they repeated, their voice a rasp that sent shivers down my spine. You know the way, don't you? The 6th rule echoed in my mind, a lifeline in the sea of surreal horror. If a customer asks for directions to the other side, tell them the station is closed and direct them back to the highway. Simple enough, but in that moment, with those eyes boring into me, nothing felt simple anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I'm sorry, but we're closed, I managed to croak out. You'll need to head back to the highway. The stranger's head tilted at an impossible angle, their neck cracking in a way that made my skin crawl. Closed? But you're here, aren't you? Surely you can help a lost traveler find their way. My heart raced, pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I thought about the legends of crossroads, of deals made with dark forces at the intersection of worlds. Was that what this place was? Some kind of cosmic junction where reality frayed at the edges? I can't help you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Please, you need to leave. For a long moment, the stranger stood motionless, their gaze never leaving mine. Then, slowly, a smile spread across their face. It was too wide, revealing too many teeth that gleamed unnaturally in the harsh light. Very well, they said, their voice now a silky purr that was somehow worse than the rasp. But remember, the door swings both ways. You may find yourself on the other side sooner than you think. They turned and walked away, their movements fluid yet wrong, like a marionette with invisible strings. The bell above the door chimed as they left, the cheerful sound jarring against the oppressive silence they left in their wake. I sagged against the counter, my legs suddenly weak. The encounter had lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours had passed. The air still felt charged, as if the barrier between worlds had been stretched thin by the stranger's presence. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The rules that once seemed bizarre now felt like fragile lifelines in a reality that was unraveling around me. And with each passing hour, I grew more certain that the gas station wasn't just a place of strange encounters, it was a battleground in a war one was only beginning to understand. The seventh rule had always seemed innocuous enough: if the power goes out, shine your flashlight toward pump 6 until the lights return. But as the last flickering bulb sputtered and died, leaving me alone in the inky blackness, I realized with growing dread that I was about to discover why this particular rule existed. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. I fumbled in my pocket for the flashlight, my fingers clumsy with fear. The beam, when I finally managed to switch it on, seemed pitifully small against the vast emptiness surrounding me. I aimed it towards pump 6, my hand shaking so badly the light danced erratically across the forecourt. In that moment, I understood why humans have always feared the dark. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the presence of the unknown. Every shadow could hide a threat, every rustle could be a predator closing in. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What if the power outage wasn't just a coincidence? What if it was engineered by whatever forces governed this twisted place? The beam of my flashlight carved a path through the darkness, illuminating pump 6 in a pale, sickly glow. I held my breath, waiting for anything to happen. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one an eternity of anticipation and fear. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the light. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Something was out there, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I wanted to look away, to squeeze my eyes shut, and pretend this wasn't happening. But I couldn't. The rules had kept me alive so far, and breaking them now seemed like a sure path to doom. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, a shape began to coalesce in the darkness. It was fluid, constantly shifting, as if it couldn't quite decide what form to take. One moment it seemed almost human, the next it was something utterly alien. My mind recoiled from the sight, unable to process what my eyes were seeing. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was certain my sanity would shatter like fragile glass, the lights flickered back to life. The sudden brightness was almost painful, and I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust. When my vision cleared, the forecourt was empty. No shifting shapes, no otherworldly horrors. Just the familiar, worn pumps and cracked asphalt. But something had changed. The air felt thicker, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And as I lowered my flashlight, my hand trembling from exhaustion and fading adrenaline, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A single, oily black feather lay on the ground near pump 6, glistening unnaturally in the fluorescent light. I glanced at the clock, my heart sinking. Dawn was still hours away, and I had a sinking feeling that the night's horrors were far from over. What other terrors awaited me in the hours to come? And more importantly, would I survive to see the morning light? As I stared at the list of rules, my eyes were drawn to the 8th instruction like a moth to a deadly flame. If you hear something tapping on the back door, do not acknowledge it. The words seemed to pulse on the page, a sinister warning of what was to come. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry as sandpaper. The night had already thrown a gauntlet of horrors at me, each one pushing me closer to the edge of sanity. But this felt different, more personal somehow, as if the gas station itself was testing me, probing for weaknesses in my resolve. At first I tried to distract myself. I restocked shelves with trembling hands, arranged magazines that no one would ever read, anything to keep my mind off the ominous silence that hung over the store like a shroud. But in the back of my mind, a quiet dread began to grow. I found myself straining to hear, waiting for the moment when the silence would be broken. It started so faintly I almost missed it. A soft tap, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerators. I froze, a box of energy bars clutched to my chest like a shield. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. A steady rhythm like raindrops on a tin roof, or fingers on a door. My heart began to race, pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the back of the store, from the door I'd been warned never to open after midnight. With each passing second, the sound seemed to grow, filling the air until it was all I could hear. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. But the darkness behind my eyelids only made it worse. In my mind's eye, I saw grotesque shapes forming in the shadows, clawed hands reaching for the door handle. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Anything to keep from crying out, from acknowledging the horror that waited just beyond that thin barrier of wood and metal. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Had it been minutes? Hours? The tapping continued, relentless. My muscles ached from the effort of standing perfectly still, every fiber of my being screaming to run, to hide, to do something. But the rule echoed in my mind, a lifeline in this sea of terror. Do not acknowledge it. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was certain my sanity would shatter like fragile glass, the tapping stopped. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. I held my breath, waiting for it to start again. But there was nothing. Only the quiet hum of the store and the thunderous beating of my own heart. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The store looked exactly as it had before, bathed in the sickly glow of fluorescent lights. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And as I turned back to the counter on shaky legs, my gaze fell on the final rule, the most ominous of them all. A chill ran through me as I read the words, knowing that the night was far from over. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the worn linoleum floor. As I read the final rule, a creeping sense of dread washed over me. When your shift ends, leave immediately. Or do not take anything with you that you didn't bring in. Simple enough, right? But as the first rays of dawn crept through the grimy windows, I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember what I had brought with me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the events of the past night. The sunglasses, the whistling, the locked bathroom door. Each terrifying encounter had blurred into a nightmarish haze. I patted my pockets frantically, searching for familiar shapes. My wallet was there, but was it mine? The keys in my hand felt wrong somehow, their edges too sharp, too new. I stumbled to the employee locker room, my heart pounding in my chest. The old metal lockers loomed before me, their peeling paint a testament to countless nights like this one. Which one was mine? I couldn't remember. I yanked open door after door, each one revealing nothing but emptiness and the faint smell of mildew. A jacket hung on a hook, its leather worn and cracked. Was it the one I'd worn when I arrived? I reached out to touch it, then jerked my hand back as if burned. What if it wasn't mine? What if taking it violated the rule? The consequences of breaking the other rules flashed through my mind, the unseen horrors that had lurked just beyond my perception all night. I caught a glimpse of myself in a grimy mirror and froze. The face staring back at me was familiar, yet somehow foreign. Dark circles ringed my eyes, and my skin seemed paler, almost translucent in the harsh light. Had the night changed me so fundamentally? Or was this gas station slowly erasing who I was, replacing me with something else? The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second bringing me closer to the end of my shift. I had to decide what was truly mine, and what belonged to this place. The line between the two had blurred, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. With trembling hands, I emptied my pockets onto the counter. My wallet, my phone, a handful of loose change. Were these the same items I'd brought with me? Or had they been subtly altered, imbued with some of the station's otherworldly essence? I stared at them, willing myself to remember, to know with certainty what was mine. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the windows, signaling the end of my shift. Time was up. With a deep breath, I grabbed only what I was certain I'd brought, my wallet and phone. Everything else I left behind. As I walked towards the exit, each step felt like moving through molasses. The store seemed to resist my departure, the air growing thick and oppressive. I pushed open the door, the cheerful jingle of the bell a stark contrast to the dread that filled me. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind. Or perhaps I was taking something with me that I shouldn't have, something intangible, yet irrevocably changed. The gas station stood silent behind me, its neon signs dark in the growing daylight. But as I walked away, I knew with chilling certainty that it wasn't over. The night shift might have ended, but its effects would linger long after the sun had chased away the shadows. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, I would find myself drawn back to this place of nightmares and impossible rules. As I stepped out into the harsh morning light, the weight of the night's horrors still clung to me like a second skin. The gas station stood silent behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting. I glanced down at my hands, noticing for the first time how pale and translucent they seemed, as if the very essence of who I was had been drained away. A chill ran through me as the truth finally dawned. This wasn't just a job with strange rules, it was a crucible designed to strip away humanity and replace it with something other. Each shift, each bizarre encounter, had been slowly transforming me into something that belonged to the station. And as I watched a car pull into the lot, a tired-looking man behind the wheel, I realized with a sinking heart that the cycle was beginning anew. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition. As I walked away, my footsteps echoing on the empty road, I couldn't help but wonder, how much of myself had I left behind? And more terrifyingly, what had I brought with me into the world beyond those fluorescent lights?
Hey, did you enjoy the chills? If you survived this night with me, subscribe and hit the bell to join our community for more spine-tingling tales. Stay safe out there, and remember, some rules are meant to be followed.